Hi, welcome to The Real with Jamantha. I'm Jamantha Williams Watson, and today we have an amazing guest. Saxophonist, performer, educator, instructor, entrepreneur, 25 records, and founder of the record label, The Name Brand. None other than Mr. James Plunky Branch. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just find that you are just simply amazing. I really do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm just fascinated to have you on our show simply because of the things that you've done. You started here in Richmond, Virginia. You were educated in Richmond, and then you went from Richmond, you went to college at Columbia University to study chemistry.
That's right. I'm always proud to say that I started in the Richmond Public Schools. Mm-hmm. I started out thinking I was going to be a chemist.
Right.
Music was always a second love of mine. I left here in 1965 to go to college at Columbia University. And when I got to New York, actually I discovered a lot of things. One of the things I discovered was that I didn't want to be a scientist. And that was for political reasons, because when I grew up here in Richmond, I'm fond of telling the story that I lived on the south side and was near the DuPont factory. And DuPont had a sign that said, better things for better living through chemistry. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to make things better for people through science. When I got to Columbia, it was very much a social activist time. Pretty soon after the sit-ins, the civil rights movement was in full swing, and so was the anti-war movement. Mm-hmm. And I discovered that if I were going to be a scientist, very likely I would have been a part of the military-industrial complex, and I was not for the war. Yeah. And so I shifted my focus. New York is a wonderful place for the arts in general, and music specifically. And what I did was I started a band on Columbia's campus called the Soul Syndicate. The band was, for all intents and purposes, a Richmond city band transported to New York. They were all students, but basically I took the concept of Richmond, what I had grown up with in Richmond, and brought it to New York. It was the first soul music band on a largely white campus. And that started my quote-unquote musical career. In my junior year, we had a major riot on campus, very much an upheaval based on 2 weeks after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Many parts of the country went up in flame, and our campus was one of those places. I left school, went to San Francisco, kind of bummed around there looking for music gigs. Ended up hooking up with a South African musician whose name was Ndiko Kraba. Ndiko was a Zulu from South Africa, and he was on exile here. And he taught me a lot about African music. He taught me that music was not just a pastime, and music was more than what we would call art in this realm. He gave me a new aesthetic. I'm defining aesthetic as a way to define beauty or value. And in the African philosophy, music has value based on how much it serves the community. And so I learned that in Africa, music was a part of everything in the culture. It was the part of how we farmed for food, or prepared for battle, or worshiped, or educated our young. And so music was judged in Africa based on how it served the tribe, how it served the community. And I began to try to incorporate some of that in what I was doing commercially here in the States. My first group out of Ndiko's group was a group called Juju, and this was 6 young guys from California. We were doing the music for a play, and Juju was dedicated to this promulgation of African culture in jazz music. And as you referred to in my introduction, sometimes I'm referred to as one of the pillars of avant-gardists in jazz. I worked with a number of musicians who were renowned in that field soon after forming my group Juju. Now Juju was African percussion with wild screaming horn like John Coltrane, and we took a very famous photograph in Kezar Stadium for one of the major anti-war rallies in San Francisco, and we showed up in full face paint, war paint, and caused quite a stir at this largely all-white gathering. From there, after that, we recorded an album. My first album was called Juju, A Message from Mozambique. And this title was basically saying this, that there was a war going on in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia, but there was also a war going on in the southern part of Africa, which was not being reported. And we were just wanting to try to get the word out that things were happening in the southern part of Africa. I moved back to New York in 1970, 71, 72, in that area, and worked with Ornette Coleman and Pharoah Sanders and Rashid Ali, Sam Rivers. These are names that people may not know, but they were giants in the avant-garde jazz realm. And my group Juju got some measure of acclaim because our group was unique in that we were using traditional African rhythms with this avant-garde music. Most free jazz music is just that. It was free, it was timeless, it was without a time signature. And our avant-garde jazz was locked down with these traditional African and Afro-Cuban rhythms. And so we got some renown there. We played at Lincoln Center. We played as a new part of New York Musicians Festival, but eventually, and for a while I ran Ornette Coleman's art gallery, and eventually I came back to Richmond. New York is a very tough place to make a living. It's a tougher place to raise a family, and one of my trips home, I found that the trees in Byrd Park were the same trees that I had used as the goalposts when we were growing up, and they were the same trees, and I said, wow, this is what it means to have roots in a place. And so because I had roots here, and because I had seen things in San Francisco and in New York, and some of the things that I had seen were not being done here in Richmond. And so I thought this is an opportunity for me to bring some of what I've learned back home. And some of what I learned was that the arts could be very much a part of political and social activism. One of the things that happened when I got back to Richmond was that I found that there were no or few black nonprofit corporations. And it was through nonprofit corporations or NGOs or different government agencies that monies would be funneled into the community. But the black community was not receiving those funds. And so we formed an organization called Branches of the Arts, which functioned like an arts council here in town. And we set about the business of trying to organize the black groups and organizations into a political unit that could both advocate for political change, but also to get funding and to do some development in the community. And so one of the things we did, we started the Richmond Jazz Society. We helped Larry Bland and the Volunteer Choir organize so that they could get grants. We worked with the Soweto Stage Company, a black theater group in town. The Black Artists Association. We pulled together a lot of organizations. We eventually got a building downtown, and we operated the first black arts gallery in the state of Virginia. We threatened to sue the state of Virginia because they weren't giving funds to black arts groups through the Virginia Commission for the Arts. And eventually, they incorporated Branches of the Arts as a part of the Federated Arts Council. Now, I'm telling this long story because Richmond has progressed, but not many people know or understand the history of our progress. And one of those parts of that history was there was a period in Richmond's history where for about 7 years we were unable to vote here in town. And this was because there was this process of gerrymandering and annexation. And gerrymandering, for those who may not know, is the manipulation of population and census and dividing into districts so that one group can maintain political control. So gerrymandering is when you fix the boundaries so that you align the voters to where it's advantageous to one group versus another. And one of the ways that Richmond would do this is, as the black population continued to grow and become more active in voter registration, what the city council and the surrounding counties would do was annex a part of the counties glom onto the city of Richmond, so that it would continue to water down the black vote. And there was a challenge to this that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And while this was wending its way through court, Richmond's elections were frozen for about 7 years. At the end of this period, the Supreme Court ruled that this kind of gerrymandering and annexation was unconstitutional. So we put in a form of government here in the city that was based on wards or districts, and they divided the city into 9 districts, 4 of which were largely white, 4 which were largely black, and 1 district which was considered a swing district. And when they finally had elections, we elected our first majority of the city council, and at that time the mayor's position was a ceremonial position that the city council members voted among themselves, and Henry Marsh was named the first black mayor of the city of Richmond. This was great, it was celebratory, it was a milestone, it was progress. However, while blacks controlled the politics of the city and the city government, the economics of the town, economics of the district was largely, and still largely is, controlled by large corporate interests. And so on the one hand, you had the corporate power. Richmond has a very active and very pronounced corporate community. It had, at the time, it had 5 of the Fortune 500 corporations. I think it's up to now 8, including the Philip Morris, which became Altria, DuPont, the International Paper Company. They had these massive companies, but those companies operated almost as ex officio citizens. They didn't participate very much in our community. So we had on one hand the city government, which was controlled by blacks, the economics, which was controlled by whites, and never the twain shall meet. However, we collectively found that the arts, it isn't pointing this long story, that the arts could be instrumental in bringing people together. There was an organization called the Federated Arts Council, which was basically a collection of all the white arts groups in the region. The Richmond Ballet, the Virginia Museum, the Richmond Symphony, and all the large organizations. And they had this organization called the Federated Arts Council. The Federated Arts Council had a massive and impressive board of directors. They had the CEOs of these Fortune 500 companies, the banks, so that they had a large pool of money. Those people, white people in general, were very supportive of their arts. They kept the Richmond Symphony going in the Virginia Museum, and they gave large donations. But they had the Federal Arts Council had a very progressive executive director. Her name was Kathy Dwyer. She happened to be not from Richmond. And so she saw that it was a new horizon. It was a black mayor, black city council. How could you get them to be more open and generous and conducive to progressive activity in downtown? And she thought that one of the ways would be to have a festival. Another way would be to bring in consultants to talk about how to make the city a more livable place. And this idea of a festival became something called the June Jubilee. June Jubilee was one of our first downtown massive festivals that incorporated visual arts and music. And it allowed the corporate community to work along with the city. And they found an amazing thing, that they could work together. And it was through the arts that brought thousands of people, tens of thousands of people downtown. At the time, Richmond's downtown was a kind of hollowed out core. People were either afraid, thought there was no parking, all the movement was out toward the malls. But we found that June Jubilee was very successful, got maybe 30,000 people in the course of a weekend to come downtown. People saw they could have a good time. Eventually, the Arts Council spearheaded something called Project One, which was to build a downtown mall right on 6th Street, joining the Coliseum over to Grace Street, a symbolic bridge across the town. And Richmond has become, in this last 30 or 40 years, a town of festivals. Perhaps the top two festivals, the Richmond Jazz Festival in Maymont Park and the International Folk Festival down on Browns Island. But there are a number of smaller festivals, neighborhood festivals, if you will, that bring people together, that show people they can have a good time, the arts as a draw, and a chance to address people in large numbers, to share political ideas, artistic gratification, education, healthcare, all come together with people coming together in safe, relatively safe spaces. And this collection of things, this disparate set of things, the idea that the arts can be progressive and bring people together, and the idea that music can be more than just entertainment, it can be a source of our education, it can be a way to rally economic development. Those two things, political activism and the arts, is what my life has been about.
Wonderful, wonderful, very well said.
Thank you.
I think not only do you say that, speak it very well, we hear that in your music as well. I'd like to hear you play.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, right.
All right. incredibly beautiful.
Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am just breathtaking.
Me too.
Literally, yeah. You know, I wanted to, you know, I know that we can see you in so many different avenues. One way is you're in my television series, The Madisons,
yes.
throughout the entire season. You know, you're there telling the story along with us. So I think it's very interesting that we have music as a storyteller, you know, as a way, social action, protest or political avenue, and you've done that so very well throughout your career.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, if you had a specific...
No, that's
no, I was going to say that, you know, it's so unique. It's different that you're using the music in that way in your movie and in your series. But it's so apropos. I mean, it's rare that you'd see a movie with no music.
Yeah.
Music kind of is used to set the mood, at the very least. At the very minimum, music is part of the background scene setting. In the instance of your series, the film, music plays kind of a much more integral part. It's not just background music.
Right.
The music itself becomes almost a character, and that's also fitting because music has personality. Music, Duke Ellington once said, music was his mistress.
Yeah.
The muses, those forces that give us inspiration, I think communicate through music, you know, and so music is an apt part of storytelling. In traditional African culture, we have griots, who are those people who, through music, recite and learn the history of a tribe or the history of an important person and tell their story with music. And I tell young people all the time, we need to use our music in other ways, and not just entertainment. I keep going back to that because people have often used our parts of our culture as if it's an artifact or something that's a throwaway. But it's much more than that. And so music can be our storytelling. And I tell young people, you know, sometimes when I used to teach school, I'd be amazed at how young people couldn't remember 2 or 3 lines. But they could remember a whole 5-minute rap song. And part of that is due to their own specific interests, but part of it's due to the fact that if you put a beat and a melody to something, it helps us remember. It helps us elongate our ability to recall. Music will give us cues to give us parts of our memory back to us. And so that's how I've chosen to use music. Again, stressing that it can be so much more than just something that happens in the background, especially if we pay attention to it.
Now, how can we'd love to purchase your albums, your memoir. You've written a memoir. I know that while you were on the road all of these years, you would have either write it down or either on a laptop, and before you know it, you have a book.
That's right.
A 466-page book.
Yes,
Wow.
my own version of War and Peace.
Wow.
Well, you can, to anybody that sees this anywhere, you can always Google Plunky, Plunky. And I'm fond of saying you get about 25,000 references, most of which have to do with me. You either encounter my website or you encounter YouTube videos or documentaries that I've either done or been the subject of. You get people's writings or reviews of my albums. You find all that online. The internet is wonderful for that. And there are not many Plunkies.
Right.
So it's easy to find me. cdbaby.com is one of the sites that I use for my distribution. I have a publisher, Cool Grove Press has my book, but you can get it on Amazon and eBay. But Google Plunky and you get me.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
What a treat. This
Thank you
is
so
absolutely amazing for us to start our show with someone dynamic as you. We just love having you. And thank you so much for watching us today. You've been watching The Real with Jamantha Williams-Watson. Remember, you are a masterpiece created by God Almighty. Now, change your mind and you'll change your world. Thank you so much for watching The Real with Jamantha. Check us out next time, right here on this station. See you then.